The Babylon Project podcast was our last best hope for reruns. It failed. But in the year of the Shadow War, it became something greater. Our last best hope for fandom. The year is 2017. The place, the Babylon Project podcast.
This is Maggie Egan, your ISN news anchor, and you're listening to the Babylon Project podcast. Thanks for listening.
Hi there, Babylon 5 fans. Welcome once again to the Babylon Project podcast. This is Raul Wybera, and I am here with my very good friend Jim Arrowwood. How are you tonight, sir?
Howdy. How you doing? No, I'm doing great. Looking forward to this episode. I think this is going to be a real interesting one to dissect.
It should be. It should be. I know I've been looking forward to it. I'm going to let folks know up front that this isn't going to be... We're going to treat both sides of the subject with the same respect that Joe Straczynski did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that a lot of people singled him out for because that was amazing.
Yeah.
This is actually one of my favorite shows of the season, simply because it is so deeply philosophic.
Uh-huh.
Not even just theologic, but philosophic.
Yeah, it gets really, really deep. This is a deep one.
We'll try not to let people's eyes glaze over too much. And for those who don't know, I have had a fair amount of formal study in logic and philosophy, and I am somewhat of a lay apologist, so it goes straight to my geek soul. Funny I should say it that way, huh?
I don't know. If that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel.
Well, I think the best way will probably be to get a recap of the thing. I have my Diet A&W in hand, and it's actually a cream soda, not a root beer. I've been on a A&W cream soda kick for some reason. It just kind of reminds. Okay, listeners, this is going to be a really dumb question, as long as we're being philosophic here. Am I the only person on the planet for whom A&W cream soda reminds you of a Stella Artois Belgian ale?
What?
There's some vanilla and fruitish overtones to a Stella Artois. There's almost no hops to it at all. It's a very, very smooth Belgian Tapas-style ale.
Yes, I know what it is. I've got some in the fridge right now.
Okay.
But comparing it to cream soda, I think you just...
Which is one of my all-time favorites.
I think you just went off the deep end.
It won't be my first time tonight.
And this episode is brought to you by A&W Cream Soda.
I'll just have to use this as an excuse to go get some Stella.
Yeah. Well, this is not the Stella podcast.
Correct. So, give us our recap, my friend.
All right.
Archive. Access. Initiated.
One of the monks on the station, Brother Edward, is experiencing some strange events as he goes about the business of the order to learn as much as they can about the religious views of the other races on the station. He is deeply disturbed by images of women that have been brutally murdered and had black roses stuffed into their mouths. He soon discovers a black rose in his bag and sees writing on the walls telling him that he walks close to death. As are the other monks on the station, Brother Edward is adept at doing computer research. And when he does a computer search to find a correlation in what is happening to him, he discovers that he is actually Charles Dexter, a murderer whose trademark was stuffing a black rose into the mouths of his victims, and was sentenced to death of personality and had his mind wiped before joining the cloister. Edward is horrified at what he discovers and decides that he must get away from the other monks, and explains to Brother Theo that he cannot expect God to forgive his sins if Edward cannot even remember them himself. Garibaldi figures out that a group of relatives of Dexter's victims have hired a Centauri telepath to break Edward's mind wipe so he remembers his crimes. The Centauri telepath is located, and Lita Alexander forces the location of the planned murder of Edward from the telepath's mind, but it is too late. Edward has been crucified and dies. The leader of the family members is arrested and also mind wiped, and ironically becomes a part of the monk's order. Lita Alexander returns to the station after spending some time on the Vorlon homeworld. She explains that her role is to run errands for Ambassador Kosh. Well, there it is.
That certainly is. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Character, files, opened.
How about our guest cast? It's kind of small this time, really. Two of them are almost even hard to call guests.
Yeah. So we have Patricia Tallman returning as Lita Alexander, whom we've previously discussed on numerous occasions.
Right.
And we have Louis Turenne as Brother Theo returning. We've also talked about him. And then...
who is Malcolm?
Malcolm is an
I'm having a brain fart.
actor named Robert Keith.
Oh, Malcolm, duh. Never mind.
Oh, who that?
Who was it? Yeah, who was, duh, never, okay. Maybe I should read my show notes before we actually record or broadcast.
Probably wouldn't hurt. Okay.
This is what our night's going to be like, my friend. I'm sorry.
All right. So anyway, continuing right along.
There's a reason we don't normally record on a Friday.
Are also guest starring Brad Dourif as Brother Edward. This is his only appearance on Babylon 5.
Major actor here.
His first big role was with Jack Nicholson on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay.
He was just a kid in that one, too. I mean, just a real skinny little kid. He was Peter de Vries in 1984 Dune.
Oh my God! I completely forgot about that.
He was the Harkonnen Mentat. X-Files.
Yes.
Yep. He was on X-Files.
Okay.
He was on Star Trek Voyager.
Uh-huh.
He was crewman Lon Suter.
All right.
Who was also a really creepy, murdery kind of character on that show. He's been on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right.
One of your favorite shows, Once Upon a Time.
Formerly one of my favorite shows.
Oh,
I gave up on it midway through season 5. It had such a wonderful start, a fantastic first season, a really good second. Third season was up and down as far as quality. Season 4, but then they did the Frozen arc, and that was actually good. And then season 5, it just, sorry, I've got better things. I've only got so many hours and better things to do with my time.
And Dourif also appeared in Lord of the Rings.
Wormtongue.
A couple of the movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
most of him appeared.
I'll tell you what.
His eyebrows didn't.
Yeah. The guy is always busy. He is always working. So, yeah, he's very much in demand as a character actor all over the place.
If you look at his filmography, this guy does science fiction, westerns, drama, comedy. You name it, he does it. And from what I have seen, he does every bit of it incredibly.
Oh, yeah.
The man is amazingly talented.
Uh-huh. And he does creepy really well.
that he certainly does.
Which we're going to find out tonight.
Mm-hmm. I kind of wish they had included the scouring of the Shire in Lord of the Rings, just to see what Dourif did with the worm tongue roll there. It would have been awesome, I thought.
Initiating plot analysis.
Okay, on with the show. The first thing I've got to say, that opening view in season 3, when you come cruising along the length of the station, that is a beautiful bit of CGI effects, especially from, 1995-ish, 96-ish?
Definitely impressive.
Uh-huh. And what an interesting opening. We're seeing Susan arguing with a monk about successes and failures and sins, and if you're going to sin, go for the big ones, as far as making bets are concerned. And we pan back to the chess match of the century.
Yep.
Sheridan
versus Brother Theo.
Sheridan versus Brother Theo.
You know, I had an interesting thought. I was thinking about this episode.
Uh-huh.
And I saw Brother Theo, short for theologian, maybe.
I'll one possibility. Okay, this is speaking as, from the layman. We never find out what Theo is short for. I know from a biblical perspective, if you go to the biblical roots, it would be more likely Theophilus.
Yeah, but no, I mean that seems like to me more than a coincidence that Theo would be short for theologian.
Mm-hmm. But remember, Theophilus is lover of God.
And then or Theodore,
or Theodore,
which was one of the chipmunks.
Oh, gosh.
We've got to get this levity in now because there's none the rest of the way.
Right. Well, speaking of theology, Sheridan and Theo are arguing theology and playing chess.
Never a good thing.
Yeah. And when you listen to it, it's like, okay, Catholic versus Protestant here. Now, Sheridan makes a crucial error.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at the board while they're arguing and makes the comment of saying that from where he sees it, Theo can't win. That's a guaranteed mate in one, right?
Yeah, of course.
Which is exactly what happens. While Susan gets called to Docking Bay 13. Apparently, Kosh is back. Except he never left. Which is a very Koshian way of looking at things.
Yeah, normal Kosh.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we find out also toward the end of this, Brother Edward is rather something of an artisan as far as the little statues, glasswork that he creates.
Uh-huh. Yeah, keep his hands busy.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I've got to add right now that really sticks out, and I almost wish we had a clip of this, but we'll have more clips of we'll have more clips of Edward talking. Is it me, or does he just sound very almost Mimbarish?
Yeah, I would have to agree. And you know what? In a lot of his roles, he often does. He would have made a very good Minbari. Him and Lanier.
Yeah. Well,
they would have some interesting conversations.
Yeah, in fact, we miss a lot of it, but they certainly do. But I was going to say, really, that shouldn't be a surprise. Brother Edward, Brother Theo, they're monks, basically priestly religious caste.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan and Lanier, religious caste. So, in one regard, it's probably not that much of a surprise, or at least it shouldn't be.
Yeah, just a different set of beliefs, different belief systems.
Uh-huh. So, Susan is off to welcome Kosh back at his ship on his return. except that, as I said, Kosh isn't inside, he's outside.
Standing outside.
Right.
And who comes out of the ship?
And he's taken an aid.
Yep.
It looks like she did make it to Vorlon space. Lita Alexander.
Lita's back.
Mm-hmm.
She's back, and she comes just strolling out of the Vorlon ship just like nothing ever happened, and almost like she owns the thing.
Very routine for her.
Mm-hmm.
Except her conversation, because she ends up in Sheridan's office with the rest of the command crew, and the way she put it, that she had been called, quote unquote, she had been called to Vorlon space. And that's a surprise because all of the races who have tried to get into Vorlon space have been meeting with accidents.
Yeah. Well, Mike says that no one has ever gone to Vorlon space and come back alive.
Yeah. Though Sebastian was in Vorlon space.
No, that's very true.
And you get the impression, you're right though. Hang on, Jim, you are right.
Mm-hmm.
No one goes into Vorlon space. Sebastian didn't go into Vorlon space. The Vorlons brought him in.
Yeah, he was
taken
abducted.
in by the Vorlons. And in a way, you can almost say that about Lita, because she ended up in a life pod with 5 days of air and water, and was basically waiting to get picked up, and even sending out a call telepathically. She didn't get picked up until she was out of air.
Mm-hmm.
So she was taken in to Vorlon space as well.
Mm.
One of the things that does come up is the concern about her being or not being Psychor. Psychor hunting her down.
Yeah, she's not bound by their rules anymore, and she's working. She lets them know she's working for the Vorlons.
Yep.
So she's under their protection, and apparently the Vorlons are more powerful than Psychor.
Yeah, because she is not worried about Psychor at all.
She, as a matter of fact, she was rather flippant about it. Normally with a teep, you say Psychor, and they get all what the? Don't call them.
Right, especially when if you're talking about a blip, a rogue telepath,
exactly,
and it means Psychop.
Mm-hmm.
Lita's attitude was almost like she was daring or wishing the Psychor would show up.
Yeah. I guess she's got a thing or two to show them.
Yeah. Garibaldi was definitely creeped out.
Yeah, so was the rest of the command staff.
Yep. Well, we're already getting some idea that there's been some connection between Vorlons and humans, so I wonder where this is ultimately going to lead.
Well, we'll have to see, because this is one of those little hints that are being dropped that we're going to have to wait a few episodes to find out what it's exactly about.
Yeah. Well, we switched back. So Brother Edward's working for he's making basically bid proposals.
Yeah.
And from the sound of it, they're pretty competitive.
Yeah, he does a pretty good sales job there.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you remember, Theo said they can support themselves.
Yep, and the client seems very interested.
Right.
So
then a black rose falls out of his bag.
And that's never a good sign. Black roses are not something that you want to see in a TV or movie or anything like that, because it's always a bad omen.
It's your first hint that something really ominous is up.
Mm-hmm. And, Brother Edward, he doesn't think much of it. He just kind of picks it up and says, a black rose. I wonder where this came from. I didn't put it there.
Yeah.
So
now, just as a side note, I keep in mind, because, there's a lot of little details that are going to be coming through over the next few seasons.
Yeah.
Interplanetary Expeditions is still a sponsor of Interstellar News.
Yeah, they're somewhere in the background. As a matter of fact, ISN. Well, why don't we have Maggie? Now that's no fun.
No, we'll be getting some more Maggie in a few episodes, actually.
Good.
And it'll be a fantastic performance just for the sake of those who haven't seen it yet. Now, Delenn comes in wanting a favor from Garibaldi. I don't even remember really what it was, but more than anything else, it was an excuse to talk about capital punishment.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, it's if you remember back in Quality of Mercy, there's still the question, it's still the death of personality.
Right.
And when you're wiping the person in that context, I would say it still falls under the category of capital punishment.
I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah, because you're theoretically at least destroying the personality. Now, I got to tell you, Mike makes a comment in this about needing electric bleachers. That is actually a Jerry Doyle quote.
Yeah.
According to Joe, he had made that comment sometime on, more than once at least, on set. And the idea of Mike being a bit of an eye for an eye kind of guy is Jerry Doyle, or was Jerry Doyle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a great quote. I think you might have that for us.
I certainly do.
You know, guys like this make me long for the days of the electric chair. Hell, sometimes I think we need electric bleachers.
What exactly is this death of personality?
Well, it started up when everybody decided the death penalty was a bad idea. Instead, you mind wipe the guy. By erasing all his memories, you destroy the personality that committed the murders. You then build a new personality and send him someplace where he won't run into the family of his victims. And after that, he spends the rest of his life doing community service, helping society. Well, they say it's more humane and keeps the prisons from getting overcrowded.
But you don't agree.
Oh, I'm an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth kind of guy, Ambassador.
So you support a system that would leave everyone blind and toothless?
Not everyone. Just the bad guys.
Just the bad guys.
Yep, just the bad guys. But how is death of personality really any better or any different?
You know,
well, all you keep in alive is a body.
I'm very uncomfortable with the death penalty, and I know there's many people that disagree with me on this issue, but you know, there have been people who have been accused of things and they didn't do it, and they find out later that they didn't do it. And, you know, what a tragedy that would be to execute someone that you don't know for sure. Now, if you know beyond a shadow of a doubt,
that's another story.
Which is the way the law is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, then it's a different situation.
Well, you know, that's what you're saying there really is quintessential to the American system of justice. You know, the idea that it is better to let 10 guilty people go than to wrongly imprison or to execute one innocent by mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the fundamental principles of American justice.
Yeah. Well, taking a life, that's serious business.
Yes, very.
And you darn well, in my mind, you darn well better know without any doubt whatsoever that this person has done what they've been accused of doing. Especially
when it's being done under the sanction of the state.
Yes.
I mean, for me, that actually raises the bar a step higher.
Yeah.
And this is coming from someone who's kind of in Mike's pro-death... Well, I'm pro-death penalty, but in the same context that you are. You have to know for sure.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, what would be the difference between that and a lynch mob?
No, the government sanction.
Exactly. So, you know, I sure hope we don't have government lynch mobs.
Well, it's happened in the past.
Oh, it has. It has. I know.
And it's happened in America in the past. I can think of some historical events.
Oh, yeah. At any rate.
At any rate, Franklin is giving Lita a physical.
Now, hold on just a second.
Yes.
This has to be the first time in Babylon 5 history that Franklin has examined a female patient and not hit on her.
I do believe you're right.
I mean,
Does Deathwalker count?
Deathwalker.
In season 1?
Yeah, I'm thinking back. That was Delenn, though, that he treated, right?
No, Deathwalker.
Oh, Deathwalker. Yeah. Well, I guess probably she was too scary.
Okay, well, why don't we clarify it? The first human patient.
Yeah, there we go. I'll go along with that.
You know, and if you put it in that context, does he ever actually examine Ivanova?
Well, I don't know.
I'm trying to think. This might be the first, but my question is this the only time he examines a female patient without hitting on her?
Huh. Well, that's hard to say because we know he treated her broken leg. But at any rate.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just thought I'd throw that out.
So this is
there.
just the first.
Yeah.
Anyway, Lita, she's not only in perfect health, but things have fixed themselves on her.
Yeah, Franklin lists off a congenital iron deficiency,
Right.
Abnormal appendix, and a hiatal hernia that has just gone away and everything is just normal.
Yeah, we get our first physical evidence that maybe there's definitely more to her than meets the eye, and maybe her flippancy towards Psychor may have some meat to it.
Yeah, perhaps some enhanced powers.
And she seems to have an unusually high level of oxygen.
Uh-huh. Well, and you know, when Franklin goes to question her about this, she kind of brushes him off and leaves, I don't know, kind of hastily.
Yeah, she doesn't want to answer too many questions, especially when it starts to connect to the Vorlons.
Yeah, now I don't know, maybe she's just not ready to answer questions yet, or she's been told not to answer questions, but in any case, she's like, well, bye, doctor, thank you, I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So long.
Yep, that's pretty much how it works out.
Yeah.
You know, I suspect we do find out, at least in some context, part of the reason for her high levels of O2 at the very end.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
I think that last scene has something to do with it, although I'll have a question about that at the end. When we get to the end, remind me that Franklin did a full physical on her.
Okay.
All right, back to Brother Edward. He's walking down the hall, and someone is painted in blood, "Death walks among you," on his wall.
Yeah. And that's pretty sick.
Yeah. Now, he calls Garibaldi in, but it's gone.
Yeah, it's disappeared. And what's the story behind that?
Mike takes Edward at his word, and he is going to investigate at least.
Yeah, but as Mike walks away from him, he kind of looks back at him like, maybe this guy's not all there.
Uh-huh. Well, back to Lita on her way, presumably to either Kasha or her quarters. She runs into Londo, and we see a little bit of a hint of the old Londo. My good friend, Lita. She B slaps him down pretty hard.
Yeah, she definitely does let him know that she has no time for him whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But Londo, he wants to know. He wants to know what things are like on the Vorlon homeworld.
Right. And he kind of makes a threat about turning her into the Psychor.
Yeah, and she lets him know, you go right ahead and see what happens to you, partner.
Incidentally, based on what I've been hearing, and gotten from the show so far, that's probably a little beyond what you would expect a level 5 telepath to be able to do. To do that kind of a deep implant that no one can break.
Uh-huh. Yeah, she says that Londo is going to suffer nightmares, unbelievable nightmares,
For the rest of his life.
for the rest of his life if he does that.
Yeah.
So if she's able to do that, she's been enhanced in some
Right,
way.
and I love Londo's response. He doesn't think he'd even notice.
Yeah, after she walks away. Well, he's kind of baked his own cake, so
Yeah, that he has.
now he has to live with it.
Delenn and Linear, you had mentioned Linear and Brother Edward talking theology. Well, that's exactly what is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Delenn is explaining her theology to Edward, and like Christianity, Delenn's people, the Membari, do believe in a soul that is real and is immaterial, but as she describes it further, it's the souls of people are parts of the universe itself trying to understand itself, which is actually a theological position called panentheism. The universe, panentheism, an alive universe that is that is its own soul.
Yeah, and it to me it kind of rang a bell of Carl Sagan, who of course was atheist, and there's no doubt about that. But Carl Sagan said we are star stuff.
That line does get borrowed.
And we are that comes up. And we are trying to understand ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I saw that as kind of a neat little correlation.
It definitely applies, though the Membari position takes it a step further to a theological state of the universe almost having a consciousness of sorts.
Right, including a soul.
Including a soul of itself. In that ways, sometimes you kind of see parallels to Buddhism, for example. Just another nod in that direction as well.
Yeah.
And even the idea of us being people, us being star stuff, that's not incompatible with Christian worldview either. In fact, I mean, that's a completely consistent position. Now, as they're talking, Brother Edward is asked about his defining moment, and for him, that is the night of Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before his crucifixion. Now, he's there in prayer with his disciples. A small group of them have gone a little further in with him, and he's asking them to pray for him. And throughout, this is in particular just some theological or some scriptural background. It's really coming more from anything else from Matthew's account. And in a lot of Matthew's account, we see Jesus portrayed as perhaps not to I'm not going to get into comparatives between Matthew and John, but we see Jesus portrayed to a large degree, especially in his miracles, as fully God. Now, Matthew's a distinctly Jewish work in its tone. So the description and the evidence of him as fully God is something that the Jewish people would see more as like his power over creation, his God-only power of forgiving sin. And the contrast here in the Garden of Gethsemane, part of the basics of Christianity is Jesus is, yes, he is fully God, but he's also fully man. And we see a lot of his, you know what, you've got the clip. Go ahead and play it because Edward explains it beautifully.
For you, personally, what is the defining moment of your belief? Not the history, the doctrines, but the emotional core of it.
On the night before our Lord was crucified, he spent the night alone in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he knew that they were going to come for him, and in a moment of weakness, he asked if this cup could pass from him, if he could be spared the pain and death that would come with the morning. And of course, the cup would not pass, and the soldiers would come to Gethsemane. But he did not have to be there when they arrived. He could have chosen to leave. to postpone the inevitable for a few hours or even days. He knew what would happen, but he chose to stay, to sacrifice himself, and thus atone for the sins of others. It's a very fragile human moment. And I've often thought about that night. And I honestly don't know if I would have had the courage to have stayed.
Powerful.
Well, and the way that he plays that brought a tear to my eye.
It is, if it seems like foreshadowing, it is pure foreshadowing. For someone that I could see that being a defining moment.
Well, Brad Dourif definitely has range as an actor.
Oh my God, yes.
Because if he doesn't believe what he talked about, which I don't know one way or the other, he sold that lock, stock, and barrel.
Yeah, he really did. He really did. Okay, now this question of, it's not just his own Gethsemane, but bear in mind that he gave the point about the Garden of Gethsemane was Jesus is not just God, he's also man, and as man, he had a lot of the same fears. He didn't want to do what he was about to do, and that was the basis of his prayers, but he chose to for others.
Right.
And keep that in mind, because especially the for others part, because that is an important part.
Then, of course, there's Edward, who doesn't know. He says, he doesn't say that he doesn't have the courage to do that, but that he doesn't know whether he does or not.
Who does until you're there?
Exactly.
To move on, we get a short background of Valen. We've heard Valen talked about before, and an important description comes up. A Membari, not born of Membari.
Yep, that will come up later.
Not later in the episode.
No, later on.
Later in the season and in future seasons.
Yes. Now, did you notice, as they part ways, Edward gives a Minbari salute?
Yes, I did.
I did. I just caught that when I watched the episode yesterday.
That was just a really classy touch to their interaction.
Yes. Well, they are, the monks are supposed to learn about other religious cultures.
To find the face of God throughout his creation.
Correct.
Yeah. Which is sort of a slight paraphrase. As a very contented Edward is heading back to his quarters, he is grabbed by a centauri on the way home, which is, it's not exactly an oops bump into. The guy grabs him on the shoulder.
Grabs his shoulder.
Yeah.
And then walks by him. Edward excuses himself and, pardon me. And the guy says, I can't remember his exact words, but it was, don't worry about it. And on the lift tube he gets.
And very quickly afterwards, Brother Edward hears a scream. And then we start to hear voices all around. And if you were watching this on a surround system, the voices are moving around spatially. And it is creepy.
Well, it is.
Yep. And the big question becomes, who is Charlie? And then the creep factor gets notched up when he starts seeing things. Splashing through water and coming upon a dead woman with a black rose.
Yeah.
So he seems to be remembering some strange things.
Yeah. Well, we don't know that he's remembering it yet. We just know that he's seeing things, having visions of some sort, whatever the source.
Yeah, though he seems to be taking it from that because he talks to Theo. And, Theo is more than a little upset himself by this.
Now, see, now, I understand, but on one hand, it seems like the way Theo behaves that he knows what's going on, but he also acts like he doesn't know what's going on.
You are right, because it'll clarify itself later. But yeah, he's definitely more worried than, okay, the poor guy is just having too much stress. Afterward, Brother Edward does a bit of research.
Yeah, Theo supposedly tucks him in for the night to get some rest.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as Theo leaves the room, he gets up and goes to the computer and
basically does a web search.
Starts a search.
To which I've got to say, 4 hours for a web search?
Well, yeah. Well, all he did was ask the computer to find a correlations, and just let it do it itself.
Okay, they didn't have Google.
No. It was a...
Okay, this was back in the days of Yahoo.
Well, it was quite a while ago, and not only that, but they needed a time span, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, Theo is talking to the command crew, at least Sheridan, and while he may not know the actual truth, he certainly has his suspicions that their current Brother Edward may not have always been Brother Edward. And he makes the comment that he is a good and decent man.
Yeah, and he has been for the 8 years that he's been part of the order. That's a long time.
Yeah. So what is a person? I mean, that's kind of the question that is being laid down here.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really deep.
Yeah. I think there's, well, what is a person?
Okay, I gave that some thought today because you put, of course, that question in our show notes. So I sat and I gave that some thought, or while I continued about my activities today. We are the sum of our experiences and people that we have been in contact with, our parents, our siblings, so forth and so on, the things we've experienced, provided that our mind works in a normal way.
But what about our choices, our decisions?
Well, they would come from our experience too.
Some might be a result of some of our experiences.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you turn on the stove.
I'm waving at you.
Yeah.
That's not a result of an experience. That's a projection into the future.
However, if you turn on the stove and burn your hand.
You learn not to stick your hand in fire.
Right. And if you do it again.
But there, it's a decision and a choice.
Exactly. But you do know what's going to happen regardless. So would a person that is in their right mind stick their hand in the fire again?
Have you seen people who snuff a candle with their fingertips without burning themselves?
I don't know.
You're again making choices, exploring, and making decisions. This kind of connects to what's called the mind-body problem in philosophy. The mind existing distinctly from the material brain. They interconnect. They interconnect tightly, but and one requires the other to be fully realized.
Yeah.
But the mind goes beyond what can be accounted for in a strictly physical explanation. And it's a subject that ranges all the way back from Aristotle to modern neuroscience, in fact.
Yeah.
There's some interesting papers out, and it's something that it's one of the things that neuroscience still hasn't been able to address, because things like to decide, to feel, as in you can't put a physical answer, for example, to love. And appreciations of things like color or beauty aren't necessarily, you run into, and it's something a lot of materialists keep banging their head against.
However, okay, we're programmed that way, though. We're programmed to appreciate beauty, and we're programmed to resist ugliness through our experience.
Not necessarily. What experience necessarily? That initial concept of what is beauty and what isn't necessarily experiential. And you can take it on to not just those kinds of abstractions, but all abstractions, because it moves into the areas of math, for example, or logic.
We learn these things, though, okay? As a matter of fact, it becomes a part of our community standards that what is considered beautiful and what is considered not beautiful. It's part of our community standard.
Yet there's certain common elements to it that transcends. It's a subject that philosophers have been banging their heads against for ages.
Well, see, and then there is the odd person, and I don't mean odd in a negative way, but there is the odd person that can look at something that a majority of people would consider ugly, like, let's say, a vacant lot full of weeds, and actually find beauty in that. If that person happens to be an artist, they can bring that out in the way they express this, and the message can be passed on that it even though it is considered not.
But you've just transcended the material, the physical, and gone into the metaphysical right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the heart of the problem. Now, I love the way Straczynski goes about this. He is not presenting an answer. He's raising the question for people like you and me to sit down and do exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So the real person, I don't know.
Well, this is going to come up again when we get to the end of Brother Edward's story a little bit later.
Yeah.
And connects with sacrifice too, in fact. The story arc, speaking of something ugly, something that's terrible, the story arc itself is heartbreakingly beautiful.
Oh, it is.
So anyway, continue. We've got to continue on so we can get to that point. Mike is talking to Brother Edward, and he just lets him know that there wasn't any blood, but he's still checking for other substances that could have been used. As in, okay, gee, is someone playing with his mind?
Or is his mind playing with itself?
Yeah, we're about to find out, because the results of the search comes through, and it turns out that there was a guy by the name of Charles Dexter who was a mass murderer,
mm-hmm.
and was subject to death of personality. And apparently, of course, this is Brother Edward.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't exactly let go, but they lost track of him, and he ended up in the general public, the general population, because of a fire.
Ah.
He survived a fire at wherever the facility was he was being held.
Uh-huh. Well, and now this comes back around to Mike's electric bleachers statement. Mm-hmm. Apparently, death of personality is not a perfect way to execute a murderer.
It seems not.
It is flawed.
So the real person
it's
still
badly
there somewhere.
It's badly flawed.
Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily easily reversed, but apparently there is some sort of way. So yeah, flawed is a good way of putting it.
If all it took was that that Centauri telepath to put his arm or put his hand on Edward's shoulder and start bringing these memories back, the death of personality is worthless, because those memories were right under the surface. It took nothing at all except for that touch.
I would agree.
So
the original person is still there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this death of personality, it does not purge the previous personality, it masks it.
Though he doesn't get all of the memories back, he's still, and we're about to see this in the conversation that occurs, he is still Brother Edward, so he's got an awareness of who he was and what he had done.
Okay, so
but
then,
at the same time, he's still Brother Edward.
Okay, so is he Brother Edward and Charles Dexter? Or is he Brother Edward who realizes that he was Charles Dexter?
Well, now, that's kind of the conversation he has with Brother Theo, because as he put it, he's bringing up the issue of confession. How is he supposed to confess his sins? The mind forgets, but the stain is on the soul, I believe was the quote. So how can there be forgiveness? And that's, straight Catholic theology.
Well, it's the law too. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse to break the law.
Mm-hmm. So it's how Catholicism requires forgiveness, or alternatively purgatory, unless of course it's one of the mortal sins. But Theo's argument, and this was the only piece of what Theo had done, and I understand the where and why, because Theo's argument at this point is a redemption of works. What Edward has done since. And I understand why he did it. It's not one to really discuss too much at this point, because it gets straight into more of the mystery of grace later on.
Yeah, because, okay, if you don't mind me interjecting.
Go ahead, please.
My understanding of Christian doctrine is when Christ died on the cross,
okay,
all sins were forgiven for all time.
Correct.
Okay, so Brother Edward's sins are already forgiven.
And the doctrine of grace that I mentioned on top of that is that forgiveness is not deserved. That's the mystery of grace.
How can it not be deserved?
Did Charlie deserve to be forgiven?
Of course he does. All sins were forgiven for all time.
They were forgiven, but did he deserve that forgiveness? And to that question, the answer is no, he didn't deserve that forgiveness. He was guilty. He was pure evil. He was a mass murderer.
Yes, but the thing of it is
he deserved justice.
Well, that means
he deserved justice and punishment. He didn't deserve forgiveness.
Okay, so then are we going to talk about degrees of sin? Okay, let me think. If I go next door to my neighbor's place and I steal a screwdriver, okay, I'm going to be forgiven for that. But if I go next door and I murder my neighbor, I'm not going to be forgiven for that. I have seen nowhere in Christian doctrine that there is a degree of what is worse or better, that sin is just sin, period. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do that. Okay, which of course was thrown out later on when Christ died on the cross.
Well, the Ten Commandments are not exactly aren't thrown out, though. It's the penalty of, and that one of the areas that causes a lot of conflict in understanding the nature of God is when you have what's the best way to phrase it? People don't understand the idea of perfection, what perfection is, and the idea of a perfect God that has perfect justice. One of the ways I like to describe it when I've been teaching people, in areas of theology is, you look at the Ten Commandments, for example. The first four are about your relationship with God. The second 5 are about your relationship with your physical relationship with others.
Mm-hmm.
And any one of those is sufficient to sever that relationship. And all of those are more physical acts, sins of activity. And then there's that pesky little 10th commandment, which essentially translates down to, if you're even thinking about it, you're just as guilty.
Well, but But
that's where we're getting in. That's where we're getting into the nature of man's fallen state, and this is a conversation that can run on for hours.
oh, it could.
Now, I can bring this around real quickly though, to get us back on track. So yeah, you've got a perfect God that, by being perfect, that means he demands perfect justice for anything that would stand or sever or break that relationship. But
Perfect justice for imperfect beings.
we weren't originally imperfect. We made ourselves imperfect by our choices. But let me finish here though, because this is going to be the key part of the whole redemption arc of this.
Mhm.
That same perfect God that demands perfect justice, part of that nature of perfection is perfect mercy. In other words, the forgiveness.
Mhm.
So how do you correlate those two things? They seem like they would be a conflict. And of course, like you just said, imperfect man. And that's the whole point of the Ten Commandments. It's not to set a standard that we have to live to. It's a mirror to show that it is not possible for man in his current state to live up to the kind of standard that God originally created us as and that we rejected with our choices. It's more of a mirror. And that's why, a lot of times people will ask, why did God have to come and pay the price himself? Well, it's part of that perfection. Only man can pay the price. And C.S. Lewis talks about this much better than I'll ever be able to. Only a man can pay the price because it's a man that sinned, that broke that relationship. But only God is capable of being that sacrifice because of his perfection. And even if you did it yourself, you're only sacrifice. I mean, if one other person managed to be perfect enough to be a sacrifice, he's basically being a sacrifice for himself. He's not sufficient to be a sacrifice for, as you put it correctly, all people, all places, all time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, and that's why the concept of what I had said earlier, fully God and fully man, is so important. And it was just wonderful the way in which Straczynski actually understood the theology and presented it very well.
Mm-hmm.
Though he does present it from a Catholic theological perspective, which falls into the category, well, of course, because Brother Theo is Catholic.
Yeah.
And I think, we just did that's the nature of redemption. At least like I said, from the theological perspective. And you've got that noted as big question. The other question is just as big. How does Edward expect to atone? Oh, and I got to bring up something. You brought up something very, very good, because Edward asks this. How can he expect to be forgiven for the sins that he doesn't remember? And you got this. You addressed it correctly. God can forgive sins that you don't remember. You might not remember them, but God does.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the more Protestant positions, that if you're repentant, it's that nature, it's the attitude of repentance that is what matters, rather than the specific detail. But that's
okay.
Catholicism versus Protestantism.
So then that has to extend to things you don't know about. Things you don't know are a sin. Like taking your neighbor's screwdriver. Okay, I took it because I needed it. My need gave me the right to take that. In my mind, if that's the way my mind is working, I have not committed a sin.
Now, I will tell you,
Now, well, let me.
This is going to be funny, because I have to be more careful of not stepping on other Christian denominations' toes.
Well, before
Okay.
you go on, though, okay. So I take that screwdriver, and my need gives me the right to keep it, and that is not wrong. That's not wrong. My need gave me the right. Okay. Someone comes along and says, "No, that is not your property. You did not work for it. You just committed a crime. So I return it." Okay. Now I know that it's wrong for me to take my neighbor's tool, but I have a need for it a week later and I do the same thing again. So the first time I did not know I was doing something wrong, and the second time I did it anyway, but I knew it was wrong. Am I going
And
to
it
be...
comes into the same category of ignorance not being an excuse.
Well, but nobody taught me. There were no rules. I have no rules. I have no guidelines.
You are coming into a territory called the moral argument, and
Exactly.
as other aspects called the moral argument for an existence of God. When the person comes up and tells you, no, you can't do that, it's against the law, who is that person to define law? You're getting the whole nature of morality. And by the way, this morality, our moral nature, it becomes another one of those things that is part of the mind-body problem, because morality is an immaterial.
The person could be someone who read the Bible and said, thou shalt not steal. That's the law. Thou shalt not steal. Steal means taking something that doesn't belong to you. Am I going to burn in hell because I didn't know I was doing something wrong? Don't I have to be aware that I'm doing something wrong before it's wrong? Supposedly when Adam and Eve bit that apple, they just automatically gleaned the knowledge of good and evil. But when a child is newborn, they have no more idea. All they know is that they're wet or stinky or hungry or uncomfortable in some other way.
Have you ever noticed you never have to teach a child to do wrong? You only have to teach a child to do good.
I'll tell you what, in my experience as a teacher, I would disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
When I start out with a class of kindergartners that's got 3 knuckleheads in it. Okay. 3 knuckleheads out of 18 students at the beginning of the year. And if the teacher does not train them how to behave, the appropriate behavior in a school, I go from 3 knuckleheads to 18. They can be taught to be bad.
Yeah, let me put it in a little more different context. It's not that a person, and we're going to avoid the nature of hell because that'll start a conversation that will get a lot of people up in arms. I don't think a lot of Christians really. I think very few Christians understand what the nature of hell really is. I'll leave it as a short version. Hell is eternal separation from God.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of what hell is. All right, at least from a theological perspective. And I know there's a lot of denominations that have different that go far beyond that.
Oh yeah.
I can make a philosophical argument how that is actually something that's worse than anyone can ever, but it's going way beyond the scope of. But the essence of it is, and remember I said that pesky little 10th commandment. It's not that, okay, you've gone and you've stolen that screwdriver.
Mm-hmm.
It's your already fallen nature. It's not that you've gone and done something to get condemned to a separation from God. And a perfect God can't tolerate. It's that you are born with that nature already, and because of that, you are separated. You know how Jesus called out the Pharisees a lot in the Bible?
Oh yeah.
The religious leaders.
Uh-huh.
There are several denominations of Christianity that are equally as guilty.
Yeah.
So anyway, and that's the whole point, though, of God being able to forgive sins that you don't remember. It's not just the individual acts; it's our nature. Now, I know we've gone incredibly long here.
Well, this is one of those episodes.
There is an interaction. The discussion Edward and Theo have on this is really powerful. And I almost wish we had played it first and then had this discussion.
Uh-huh.
But let's go ahead and play it anyway. And this is, folks, bear with because it is a bit of a longer clip. And that's why we're kind of discussing whether or not to play it through. But let's go ahead and play it since we're already running long.
Yeah.
Edward? Edward, what are you doing? We've been looking for you. You have to come with me.
I can't go back, Theo. How could they do it? They say it's humane, merciful. Do you know what it's like to wake up one day and discover you're a monster, a murderer?
Listen to me, Edward. We can work this out.
No, it's too late. What if I had died, Theo, never knowing what I had been? How can I confess my sins to God if I don't even know what they are? The mind forgets, but the stain remains with the soul. The blood of innocent people is still on my hands. My memories are the creation of somebody else, and my soul is the soul of a killer, and everything that I have done has been a lie.
That's not true, Edward. You've helped people, cared for people.
It's not enough. Who knows what other crimes I may have committed that they never found out about, that I don't remember. I am a murderer, Theo. The sins of my former life must be atoned for. There must be justice. I know that now.
Edward! Edward! If you ask God to forgive your sins, He knows what they are, even if you've forgotten. Leave it in His hands.
Goodbye, Theo.
Incredibly powerful.
It is. But
And-
he has turned his back on the doctrine. Because Brother Theo had it right, according to what I've been taught.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, his sins are forgiven. All he has to do
Yes.
is ask. And he doesn't
Yes.
he doesn't need to know what they are.
Now, in this case, from that theological perspective, yes. But Edward is right in an aspect of it too, that his works, his deeds aren't enough. And you nailed it. It's God is bigger than that. God is bigger than if it was our deeds or if it was what we did, there's no reason that Christ would have had to come, that God would have had to come and make the kind of sacrifice.
No,
So you're absolutely right. That's the fundamentals of the doctrine of grace. You don't have to do anything. You have to ask.
the problem that we've run into here is from Brother Theo's perspective, not that Brother Edward is not going to be forgiven, but that Brother Edward will not forgive himself.
Yes.
He feels that there's a price that he has to pay, but there's no payment big enough to undo what he's done.
Now, I'm going to swing into some of the dramatic elements that Straczynski is using here, and what he's setting up. Remember, and you go and look over some of Straczynski's comments on the Lurker's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
He now knows what has been done, but he doesn't know who Charlie is, as in know himself as Charlie. In a lot of ways, Charlie is a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has been done with Edward from the very beginning is the absolute innocence. And I don't mean naivete, but I mean the concept of an innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Edward, the personality, the person, Brother Edward, is an innocent.
Yes.
And that's going to be, I'm agreeing with you completely. It's how it's being used in the drama. But yes, he's not forgiving himself.
Yeah. So now to get back into...
But it's stepping it up for a moral lesson.
Yeah. Well, the context of the show
Right.
is, all right, we know that Brother Edward used to be Charles Dexter. We have forgiven Brother Edward for being Charles Dexter.
That's a good question, but have we forgiven Charles Dexter?
Well, we don't know.
By
who
the way,
he-
think of the name Dexter.
Well,
Wasn't there a show that kind of? I wonder if the show Dexter was a tip
well,
of the hat.
what about Charles Manson? Okay, the name
Good
Charles.
one.
That crossed my mind also. However, we like Brother Edward.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know this other person. We know who Edward is. We know he's a good person. We know now that he's a tortured soul, and we feel badly for him, which really sets up what happens next.
But do we feel badly for Charlie, or do we feel anger toward Charlie? And I'm not saying one, because there's certainly enough people that I've known in my past whose reaction to who and what Charlie is would be pure anger.
I don't think it matters anymore. He's gone. There is no such person any longer.
Except we've already found that the death of personality is far from perfect.
We don't know who Charles Dexter is, but we know who Brother Edward is.
Right.
And we know we like him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, boom.
Partly because he is an innocent.
Yes.
Yeah. And like you said, it's setting up what's going to be coming.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is Mike finding evidence that they are trying to break Edward. Someone is trying to break Edward. And it certainly sounds like someone's after revenge. So now the station's approach, they've changed. Instead of investigating, now they're trying to save Edward.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of right along the lines of what you're saying. They don't know Charlie Dexter. They know and they like and they care about Brother Edward.
Yeah. That's another disturbing point. Here Mike is, okay, a realist.
Mm-hmm.
And there is that murderer, okay, who's had his mind wiped, but he's still a murderer. I am surprised that Mike just says, we ought to just put you in the chair and be done with it.
I have found that far too many people don't walk the walk that they talk.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
And I think that's a bit of the case here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I remember the current Catholic position, and I know there's a lot of, of course, the Catholic position is very strong against abortion, and I'm not going to get into that so much.
No.
But there's another side of that. An overwhelming number of Catholics, a huge number, are equally opposed to the death penalty, and for much the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
The preciousness of life, and a lot of Christians, you will find, are opposed to the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that fallen state and the whole bit about choice, choosing to ask God's forgiveness. When you kill that person, you've taken that choice from them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biblical teachings, is one of the most misunderstood, is not to judge how it's commonly used today, but to judge in the concept of condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
Is a power that God has reserved to himself.
Exactly.
Now, in areas, especially in Old Testament, and even Paul talks about the state being given the sword. God's delegated that, but from an eternal perspective, at least, God reserves that to himself, and it's not for man to take. And that's why you'll see a lot of Christians take a very principled opposition to the death penalty.
Mm-hmm. It's final. It's
final.
Absolutely final.
And from a Christian perspective, if you've killed someone, depending on their state, I mean, there is no more option of choice for that person.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, though, that would be more than happy to pull the switch.
That goes back to our fallen nature. And, I'm not going to get there. It'll get us both in trouble.
Yeah, most likely.
Anyway, Edward is having his Gethsemane moment. He is in a chapel. It looks like a chapel way out and down below, praying. And speaking of powerful moments, you notice how it goes from the regular orchestral music to, as his accusers come in, to Gregorian.
Yes.
Was that not powerful?
Oh, yeah.
And the leader of the bunch, oh gosh, and this goes right back to what you were saying, is both people walking what I was saying about walking the walk that they talk versus being willing to pull the switch. Their leader, the way he just portrays evil is chilling.
Yeah.
And I've used that word a few too many times here, but it's the only one that applies.
Yeah.
And he makes the comment, this goes back to something else you had mentioned. When you go to hell, the question is, would he?
Well, exactly. Because as you just said just a few moments ago, God reserves that judgment to himself.
Correct. And you certainly get from the conversation he's had in the past, he may not have forgiven himself. He might feel that he needs to pay more.
Mm-hmm.
But I get a real feeling, a real sense that he has made, and we'll see this again further, that he's done what you had said. He's asked God's forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the impression it leaves you with. So when you go to hell, would he? No. Why? Because he's asked for, he sought that grace. That one's not a hard argument to make. Lita, they're still trying to save Edward. They kind of bend the rules just a little bit there.
Oh boy, do they.
Yeah. Lita's a little bit stronger than a P5, I think.
Yeah, she's ramped it up quite a bit.
Yeah, she basically rips what she needs to know out of that Centauri telepath's mind when he is trying to keep her out.
Mm-hmm. Which is something that wouldn't have been allowed from her predecessor.
Right, and if her predecessor was even capable of doing it, or if the pre-Vorlon Lita was even capable of doing it,
yeah,
I don't think she would have been able to.
No, Bester would have.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody less than Bester would be able to.
I don't think anyone less than yeah. Now, just as a side note, keep this in mind for future episodes. Zach is still in Night Watch. He's still wearing that armband.
Yeah. He's not, and that doesn't seem to be making a great deal of difference at this point. It's just, he is there.
An extra 50 credits a week.
Yep.
But they do find, Theo actually finds Edward crucified, tortured, dying.
Yeah.
And they find the murderer.
And he is more than happy to say, I did it, and I'd do it again, and I don't care.
And he notes the others didn't have, they weren't willing to be that, when they actually were face to face with it, they weren't willing to be that final judge.
No.
But this was the guy that, as you said, was more than willing to pull the switch.
Yeah, big time.
There is that moment where Theo gives Edward his last rites, and that actually is the Catholic last rites.
Yeah.
There's been a few tweaks. He made a few tweaks of, bringing it into the 23rd century.
Mm-hmm.
But that is, and he makes it clear, Theo makes it clear that, yes, there is enough forgiveness for those who would seek it.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's basically the whole mystery of grace.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, it tore me apart. Absolutely tore me apart when Brother Edward started out saying, I'm afraid. I felt so lonely and so bad for this guy.
Yeah, well, that's the human condition.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Jesus was afraid in the garden. Mm-hmm. That was the whole basis of his prayer.
Yeah.
But he did what he did anyway. And here's that parallel that I had been hinting at. Jesus died for other people who did not deserve it at all. That I'm going, at least as a man, he didn't know personally whatsoever, but he did not have a personal relationship with. I'll put it in the theological context phrasing there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly what Edward did here. It's that Christ figure giving his life for someone he really didn't know and who really didn't deserve it, for that person's redemption.
Mm-hmm.
And look at Through the Lurker's Guide, because Straczynski does discuss, it's like, if you're reaching that, that's exactly what he's getting to in that nature of redemption. And yeah, I'm afraid it's just powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's human. The mystery of grace. Okay, Susan and Lita are chatting. What's odd about this picture?
Susan doesn't like telepaths.
Yeah, Susan doesn't like telepaths. Of course, Lita is not exactly what you would call your typical telepath here.
Mm-hmm.
She's rejected the Psi Corps. She's fought the Psi Corps. She's run from the Psi Corps, and she's working for Kosh. So I guess there's some room for an exception.
Well, yeah. And plus, Susan was, of course, being, as we remember from several episodes ago, Susan was being suspected of being a Psi Corps plant,
right?
A Psi Corps agent, and Lita made it very clear that it wasn't Susan, and pointed and brought out who actually was the Psi Corps.
Yeah. In fact, I would almost argue that since Lita was able to feel that Susan was able to resist her, it's almost like you would almost expect that to be an additional barrier between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But I think both of them being on the bad side of the Psi Corps, amongst other things, I think Susan's a little more willing to put that to the side.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah. I think there probably is an element of that.
Yeah.
We've been talking in and out about forgiveness. There is a conversation, it's almost at the end here, that occurs between Sheridan and Theo. And I'm going to go ahead and let you play it before we discuss it.
Okay.
I was going through Edward's effects when I found this. I know he wanted you to have it. I'm afraid he never had the chance to finish it.
You take away a man's life, memory, and payment for his crimes, and it's still not enough. Where does revenge end and justice begin? Forgiveness is a hard thing, isn't it, Theo?
I don't think anything can ever be more difficult.
I'll keep this in a place of honor. Thank you.
Brother Theo, I'm ready to go now.
Good. Good. I'll walk you to your ship. Captain, this is Brother Malcolm. He has just joined the Order under most unusual circumstances. I asked for him specifically when I heard he wanted to serve others. He's about to leave for the monastery back home, where he will be trained, and trained well.
It is all that I've wanted to do my whole life, as long as I can remember. It is an honor to meet you, Captain. I've heard so much about you.
You must excuse the captain, Malcolm. You interrupted his train of thought. I believe you were saying that forgiveness is a hard thing, but something ever to strive for. Were you not, Captain?
Yes. Yes, I was. Good luck to you. I hope things work out.
I'm sure it will. Thank you, sir.
We must be going along now. You will miss your flight.
Yeah.
Brother Malcolm.
Yeah. I was, almost in the same breath. Sheridan says, oh, it's not enough the price that he paid, having his personality changed and everything. And here comes Malcolm, and it's like Sheridan forgot everything he just said. Because this person killed someone he liked.
Yep. And that's some of the stuff I had mentioned in the past in our discussion was leading straight to this moment.
Sheridan thought, Malcolm thought he was doing the right thing, taking revenge. Okay. Charles Dexter was just a sick individual who was committing murder for murder's sake.
Well, we don't know what motives.
The guy was sick. First of all,
yeah.
There I do. To take another human life is not a normal act to begin with.
Not necessarily a normal act. You need to qualify self-defense, warfare.
No, it is not. It is not a sane act. In self-defense and warfare and so forth, there's a lot of training that goes along with that. I mean, I could not right now fight in a war. I would not be effective because my training is years in the past. Okay, I would have to be retrained in order to do that.
Right.
Okay, so, but Charles was a murderer. Okay, but we liked him. Malcolm is a murderer, only he was taking revenge for all those people that Charles killed, and Sheridan was about ready to condemn him just out of hand.
Yeah, and what Theo shows, and kudos to Straczynski for the way he does this. It is perfection.
Oh, it is.
The way what Theo shows, especially notice that Theo asked for him. That's biblical grace. That's the kind of unconditional grace, that unconditional forgiveness that I've been talking about. I'd be more of a Sheridan, though I don't know the extent to which I would respond to Theo's conviction of Sheridan's words, convicting him of his words. Sheridan shows himself to probably be a better man than I am, in that he starts down that path, but as uncomfortable as it is, and it's clearly uncomfortable, he still reaches out to him.
Oh, it would take a lot of soul searching on my part.
Yeah. I don't know, honestly. I don't know if I could.
I think I could, but it would,
I hope I could.
It would be an effort.
Yes.
But I think I absolutely could come around.
I probably could at that, but not nearly as quickly as I would. Definitely need more time.
Well, I wonder if you would, if it were...
Of course, you've got the constraint of 43 minutes.
Well, no, not only that, but I wonder if you would still need a whole lot of time if you just said something and then were just about ready to absolutely trash everything that you just said was your convictions, and somebody says, now, wait a minute, you just said this, okay? You just said this. All right. Now, did you mean that or not?
I sure hope I could.
That was a very realistic thing that took place in that scene.
It was.
Okay, you just professed to think this way. Now you're telling me you're thinking that way? You can't have it both ways, partner.
Right. And if that's not enough to end the episode. And yes, I'm moving us along, but only because we've been recording this now for almost 2 hours.
Yes, I see that.
It seems Lita has gills.
Yeah, I know.
Well, the Vorline atmosphere is supposedly not compatible for humans, so...
Yeah, so she's been altered to breathe their atmosphere.
Right.
And her O2 level has been elevated, as we talked earlier.
Yes. And it seems there's some sort of connection with Kosh.
Yeah, and it almost seemed like Kosh was downloading information from her.
She sort of, and that kind of fits actually, like with Talia. With that Mentat guy downloading.
Oh, yeah.
But what is the nature of that downloading? It's...
Well,
how did you put it earlier?
Has Lita become Kosh's eyes and ears on the station? Does she?
It sure seems to be.
Or
hinted at that.
Or is he putting some of his essence into her and walking with her?
Well, we'll eventually find out what's going on.
Stay tuned, folks.
But go back to the episode Knives.
Right.
When Sheridan is having those visions and he goes out to Sector 14. And it's a very similar effect.
Yeah, he has something leaving him and going out into open space.
Right. Though it doesn't seem like it was a Vorlon, at least, in this case.
No.
Or in that case.
No.
Well, my friend, this has been a very long... I've enjoyed the conversation, though.
Yeah. Well, I knew this was going to be a longer episode when we started it, because what else could it be?
No. And, boy, I'm glad Straczynski actually wrote it the way he did, too.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I bashed on JMS in the last episode because of the trite little story of that seemed like a Star Trek reject story. This way made up for that.
Star Trek would not have addressed the conversation in this way. In fact, I can't think of anything on television that would have addressed it quite the way he did here.
Well, what's really amazing is the all of the little detail. I mean, we have spent 2 hours discussing 46 minutes worth of program, and
we could easily spend another 2 hours.
When we barely scratched the surface of everything that went into this,
Yeah.
So, the philosophical aspects, the theological aspects, the moralistic aspects, the societal aspects. There's so many different facets to this that it would be, it's impossible to do in a short amount of time.
No, you can't. And he's touching on the core questions of the human experience here.
Yes.
Why are we here? Where are we going? Why has man been messed up? How do we fix it? Those are core questions of the human condition. And it doesn't matter if you're Christian, if you're Buddhist, if you're humanist, if you're atheist, if you're Muslim, it doesn't matter. Those questions are what those worldviews are trying to address.
Well, what we have been struggling with as a species for centuries, trying to understand ourselves.
That we would take 2 hours discussing it is not a surprise at all.
No.
That Joe Straczynski could put such a clean presentation of the questions in 43 minutes, that's impressive.
Yeah. To be sure. Well, next time we are going to be looking at voices of authority.
Yes. Wham.
And yeah, got some interesting things coming up with that. And that'll be next time. So, did we have any boom today?
Sir, hang on before we go there.
Oh.
I need to take a moment and make a statement in general, and not to you. To anyone who hears this podcast and manages to sit through, some 2 hours of this discussion, take a lesson from what Joe Straczynski did and what Jim and I have done here. People avoid these discussions for some reason. It doesn't do anyone a bit of good, and in fact, it does us a whole lot of harm to avoid these discussions. Discuss and talk. Do it with a kind of respect that Jim and I have different perspectives and different positions. It doesn't mean you don't talk about these things. It means you discuss. It means you learn. It means you seek truth. Okay? That's my pulpit moment. That's why Joe wrote the show. In fact, you look at his comments and he's clear about it. That is why he wrote the show. Discernment of truth, I think, is a big basis about what art is. And whether we, agree or disagree on those, that discussion, that journey is part of that human condition. And it's an important part of it. And I think, and this is one of the things that, especially with stuff that is happening in this world now, take the lesson that Joe gives us. It's a good approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only thing I could add to that is just keep an open mind.
Yeah, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And you were about to ask something.
I was going to ask if we had any boom today.
You know, we had a whole lot of stuff today, but no, we didn't have any boom.
No literal boom, but we certainly did have a lot of figurative boom.
A lot of theological boom.
Yeah.
A lot of philosophical boom.
I'll tell you what, if you're going to
Booms of the best kind.
If you're going to hang in there and listen to this entire episode, kudos to you, and huge kudos to our editor, Troy Rudder, who's put up...
Troy, you are our hero.
You are a saint, sir. Thank you.
Yep. But no.
Boom tomorrow?
No, there will be boom tomorrow.
Tomorrow we'll have some boom.
There's always boom tomorrow.
Good night.
Good night, folks.
Podcast terminated. Thank you for listening to the Babylon Project podcast. You can email Raul and Jim at the Babylon Project podcast @gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at the Babylon Project Podcast. On the internet, we are at babylonprojectpodcast.wordpress.com. To subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on iTunes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed on the webpage.